I would like to share an experience with you that I had back in 2014. It was specifically during the month of August. And it's an experience that I can relate to the Apostle Paul when he said, "Whether I was here or in the spirit, I do not know." But I know that in my life, I had seen many things in the spirit since I was a little girl. In fact, I had began seeing in the spirit through dreams and visions at the age of 7. But in the majority of those dreams and visions and encounters that I had, most of them were particularly about the end times, about the tribulation, the rapture of the church, world events that would unfold as I got older. I had visitations from Jesus himself as a little girl, and he would come and tell me things. And a few times I saw angels as a little girl, very seldom though, but the majority of the time I was more so tormented. The enemy constantly tormented me as a child. I even saw my own funeral at one point. And throughout the years, the Lord had never allowed my gift of being able to see to dim. However, I had constantly read and heard stories of many people who had many testimonies, including my own mother, of people who had gone to heaven, who had seen the pearly gates and the golden streets and the gardens and all of the beautiful things that the scripture tells us about that it awaits us. I had never specifically even asked Jesus to show me these things. I'd just seen so many things that were pertaining to the future here on earth. But in the earlier part of 2014, I had an encounter where Jesus came to visit me. It was in the month of January, and he told me he wanted to take me into hell. And after that experience, I began to pray, and I said to the Lord, "Lord, my whole life I've seen so many things that you'd shown me, things that had come to pass, things that had not yet come to pass, and yet they were always things pertaining to the tribulation or towards things from other people, but I'd never ever seen heaven, and it never asked about it, never crossed my mind." In the form of kind of a temper tantrum, if you would like to call it there, I said, "Lord, you've never taken me to heaven. You've never allowed me to see any of these things." And so it was kind of my self-absorbed moment, if I can even call it that made me feel as though, why do I have to go into hell first? Well, this tangent, if you want to call it that, and it went on for approximately 4 to 5 weeks, and then I silenced myself within my heart. But the interesting thing that it was about 6 months after that I had this encounter, which the Lord later came back and said to me, "I granted your request." And so I want to share this with you because it was a very, very powerful encounter that I, of course, do not feel deserving of even to this day, years later. But I found myself in this place. This place was green. It had the most beautiful, luscious green rolling hills as far as the eye could see. And I was standing there. And as I was looking over the hills, observing where I was at, because I had no idea where I was at, I began to see people coming from a distance, and they were walking towards me. But yet they were not making any sort of eye contact with me. And a lot of them were walking alone. They were male and female of all types of ages and sizes and colors and all of that distinction. But no one was making eye contact with me. I saw them in twos and some in threes, and they were conversating amongst each other in such joyful, blissful conversation. Finally, I saw a man approaching me from a distance, and he seemed to be coming directly at me, and he actually made eye contact with me. And he was smiling. And so as he got closer and closer to me, within myself, I knew exactly what I was going to ask him. I knew that I was going to say, "Well, where am I?" But as he came face to face with me and I opened my mouth, something totally different came out. Instead of me saying, "Where am I?" I said, "Who are you?" And of course, the man, he did not even hesitate. He looked straight at me with a smile and bright eyes, and he said to me, "Do you know the story of Jonah?" And I paused for a second, and I said, well, yes, I do. I do know the story of Jonah. He says, "Well, then you know that there are those who repented when he preached the judgment." And I said, "Well, yes, I do. I do know that." And he said, "Well, I am one of those people." And then with that, he smiled, he nodded his head, and he walked right past me. At this point, I didn't know what to have, this feeling inside of my heart, like, where am I? Oh my, where am I? And I began to slowly turn around. And as I slowly turned around, I found myself in this hall, this beautiful hall. And there were many, many, many people gathering there. It was almost like the people that I had seen coming over those hills, like they were coming to this place, this hall. And I began to look around me to the left and to the right, and I saw that the people, multitudes and multitudes of people, they were forming in this U shape. And when I looked below me, I saw this floor that looked like a sea of glass. It was so beautiful. It was like it literally was made of diamond. It was transparent, and yet it captured light and reflected it back out, and we were all standing on it. And you could tell that they were gathering for something, but what, I didn't know. I just finally, after looking around and seeing the gathering of the people and seeing that all of their faces were turned towards one direction, so then I decided to follow and to turn towards the direction that everyone else was looking. And as I turned and looked ahead, as I looked up and looked ahead, to my surprise, off in the distance, yet though it was in the distance, it seemed so close, like it was right there. Oh, in the distance, I saw a throne, a massive gold throne. And there was a light protruding, piercing white light. But you have to understand, this light that came from the center of this throne, this white, bright, the whitest white that you could ever imagine. It was so bright, yet it didn't hurt your eyes. Like, here on earth, when we look at the sun or we look at something that's really bright, we tend to squint our eyes, right? Almost in pain and agony, like your eyes can barely hold all of that, the light coming in, the rays coming into your iris. But it wasn't like this at all. No, this light, though it was bright, though it was piercing in the sense, yet there was no pain in it hitting your eye. And it radiated from the center of this throne. And I looked as hard as I could. I focused my eyes to see as much as I could. And I noticed that from the outside of the piercing white light that seemed to illuminate the entire place that we were in, and this place was massive. But it came out in layers. And from the outside of the white light was a thin layer, a thinner, much thinner layer of what seemed to be like a baby blue light. And then from the baby blue light came this massive ray of gold light. Just massive ray. And the light itself seemed to have life to it. It was like it was substance. And so I'm fixing my eyes again to the center of this throne, and the radiant, beautiful, majestic light that is coming from the center of it. And on the outside, I could see hands that were resting, massive hands that were resting on the sides of the throne, resting. I could see the hands, I could see the outlines of fingers. And then towards the below, I could see what was draped and caught in multiple layers, a robe, white, resting on the floor that looked like a sea of glass. And the only way I can explain this to you was that what I saw in that robe was like the universe. It was like the universe itself, the galaxy, everything that is beautiful about that layer of heaven was in his robe. And then as I looked up again towards above the center where this light, this radiant white light was falling or piercing out of, I saw what looked like the outline of hair, but I'm not sure, but it looked like there was hair that was sort of long, wasn't short. But that was it, because the rest of them was shrouded in white light. You could not see any features of the face. It was like the light itself didn't even come out of his face. It was like it came out of his heart, like it came out of his chest. And this throne was massive. I can't even explain how large it was. And it was gold. It was made of gold and fire. And to the left and to the right, I saw smaller, similar thrones. But they were smaller and not as huge and not as majestic. And upon each of those thrones were people, men. They were also dressed in white. Everything about them was white. It was like they were shrouded and clothed in the light itself as well. But I could see them more clearly. I could see their faces. I could see the wisdom that was in their faces. And I just knew that they had been there long before we had ever come into existence. They were his counsel, full of wisdom. I knew who I was standing in front of. I knew that I had been presented before the Ancient of Days. And without even having to take my fingers or with my own human knowledge trying to count, I knew that each side of that throne sat 12 thrones, for a total of 24, 12 on one side and 12 on the other. And they just sat there. And as I was absorbing this, someone from behind me, who I never turned around to see who he was, but he touched me on my shoulder. And he spoke with such a loving, calm, peaceful voice, and he said, "He's waiting for you. Go forth." And with that, he kind of nudged me softly to go forward. And I began to walk. I never looked behind me to see who it was that touched me. But I was compelled now to go forth towards this throne that seemed forever and a day away, yet it was right there. And I began walking. I no longer looked to my left or to my right to see the people that had gathered into this hall or the music that seemed to be coming out of thin air. But I began walking now towards this throne, and I got to just the outer layer of this light, this piercing light, basically the golden area, the area where the gold light, this light that had life in it. Life, it sparkled, it sprung out from him. And that seemed to be as far as I could go. Though again, I could see the throne and the 12 thrones on each side. I could see them very clearly. But it still seemed a mile and away and a day away. But I stopped at this golden light that I was now standing in. It was enshrouding me in it. And as I stood there, these waves, only thing I can explain, like these pulsating waves began to go through my body. And they were making a sound almost like an electric current. And they were literally going through every molecule of my body. and it began to thrust me backwards. But I never lost my footing. But my body began to thrust backwards, and waves, as these wave upon wave of this power, this current was running through my very being. Without moving my lips, but thinking within my thoughts, I just said within myself, I said, well, this must be the presence of God. And immediately I was corrected, because my thoughts could be heard. Like, you don't have to speak with your mouth there. It's almost like you communicate telepathically. But immediately as I thought, oh, this must be the anointing. This must be the presence of God. No, I was told, no, it is love. And as this current was going through my body and I was thrusting backwards, I felt naked, stripped, searched of every corner, every crack, every crevice of my being. And yet I felt the most incredible love, like I was the only child, like I was the long lost love of someone, the long lost lover that someone had not seen in years. And yet it was all about me in that moment. And I felt like I was the only one in that room. But what went through me put me on my face. I didn't just drop to my knees, but I found myself on my face, bowed down, with almost like my hands over my head, but not out of fear and not out of shame, but just simple reverence. It was just reverence. And I was laying there with my arms covered over my head, and I began to speak. But once I opened my mouth, I realized that there wasn't words that were just coming out, but a song. And I began to sing, I give myself to you, Lord. I give myself to you. I give it all away. I give myself to you, Lord. And it just kept coming out and coming out and coming out. And I don't even know how long I experienced that. But I did it until I felt that I had poured every part of me out before him. I laid there. And then when I knew that it was done, like I just knew it was done, it was done. And then I laid there in silence. And all I could do was begin thanking him for everything, thanking him for all the days and all the weeks and all the months and all the years that he had given me. Thanking him for not allowing me to die in my sins, for waiting for me, even when I had turned my back on him, even when I had said to him that I wanted nothing to do with him. And yes, there was a point in my life when I said that, and knowing that I was laying before him, the creator of my soul, the creator of who I am, and being able to lay before him and thank him was something that I couldn't give enough for. And I laid there, face down, flat prostrated before the throne of God, thanking him. And once that happened, then I was done. And I lifted up my head. And when I lifted up my head, I was back at home. And so I wanted to share that with you. The most powerful encounter that I had ever had. And when the Lord came to me a year later to talk to me about it, we conversated about it, and I thought, I knew so many people with soft pearly gates and golden streets and flowers that sang and grass that didn't bend and cities made of gems and crystals and saints, loved ones, even people have seen loved ones that had passed away. But for me, he had taken me to the throne. And he allowed me to see a glimpse of the Father, the person The only person who I say, who have I in heaven but you, Lord, is my famous line within myself. Who have I in heaven but you, Lord? Because he is my heaven. For me, pearly gates and mansions and houses made of diamonds, it means nothing to me. And I'm not saying that to downplay or to downgrade what heaven is, but for me, he is my heaven. That is all I look forward to. I only want to see his face in the end. Heaven is also a personal heaven for each and every one of us that will make it there. This was my heaven. So I wanted to share that with you. I want to thank you for taking time out to listen to this. I pray it encourages you, motivates you to keep running the race to the end. He who endures to the end will be saved. And this is what we have to look forward to, and many, many, many other things as well. God bless all of you all. Shalom.